From the very beginning of your relationship with a narcissist, whether it's a partner, a parent, or even a boss, you probably sense that something wasn't quite right, but you couldn't put your finger on it. Everything seemed loving, generous, even too good to be true at first. Then slowly, the truth began to reveal itself. Criticism disguised as just being honest. Silent treatment reframed as giving you space to think. You began to feel like you were walking on eggshells, adjusting your emotions, your words, even your facial expressions, just to avoid upsetting them. That's when fear started to take root, not as a survival instinct, but as a psychological signal that whispered, if you want to keep this relationship, you need to submit. And strangely enough, you started to believe it. If I'm just more patient, they'll change. If I stay quiet, things will go back to normal. If I love them enough, they'll finally see me. But this is the trap narcissists build. They condition you to twist yourself into shapes that serve them, while they never lift a finger to grow. Over time, fear in you evolves. It's no longer just fear of their rage. It becomes fear of losing the illusion of love, even if that love is conditional, painful, and toxic. But real love doesn't make you feel small, anxious, or unsure of your worth. The narcissist doesn't crave love. They crave control, and the weapon they use to get it is your fear. They make you believe that if you leave, you'll regret it, that no one else will understand you like they do, that you're the problem, that you're too sensitive, that you're too much, that you're not enough. These toxic messages, repeated often enough, become internal truths. And that's the moment when you begin to lose your boundaries. It doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual, subtle, and consistent. A demeaning joke in public, a dismissive glance when you share your opinion, just kidding after a cruel insult, a slow, relentless manipulation wrapped in the language of love. And one day, you wake up with a foggy mind, a heavy heart, and a question you never dared ask. If I stopped fearing them, who would I be? That question is the beginning of a turning point, because when you start to question the fear, you begin to reclaim your inner authority. When you realize that your fear isn't a response to true danger, but the result of giving someone else the power to define you, you begin to see clearly. And no, you don't have to make a drastic decision overnight. The first step is simply choosing to stop handing over your emotional loyalty without conditions. You start responding differently. You stop over-explaining, and you stop worrying about hurting their feelings when they never worried about yours. You stop trembling when you say no, and slowly you realize you may still feel fear, but it no longer controls you. That's the moment their power starts to crumble, because narcissists don't control you with actions. They control you with your reactions. And when you stop reacting like someone who's afraid, you begin living like someone who's free. When you stop reacting from fear, everything begins to shift, not only inside of you, but inside the narcissist as well, because for so long they've been feeding off your emotions. Your anxiety was their daily nourishment. Your worry was their proof that they still had power. And your fear? That was the invisible chain that kept you locked into the role of the submissive one. But when you quietly step out of that role, without arguing, without apologizing, without shrinking yourself anymore, their entire script starts to fall apart. At first, they may pretend not to notice. They might still smile, act civil, maybe even praise you. You've really matured. But the truth is, they're testing you, watching closely, trying to figure out if this shift is real or just another emotional tactic to win their attention. When they realize you're not waiting for a reaction, that you've let go, not because you lost, but because you're done playing, that's when their internal panic begins. A narcissist doesn't know what to do when they lose control. They have no backup plan for when you stop complying. And once you pull away from their grip, they become disoriented. They'll try to pull you back, first with sweetness, charm, those long-lost compliments you once craved, those promises of change you waited years to hear. But if that fails, they switch to aggression. Blaming, criticizing, smearing your name, not because you truly matter to them as a person, but because you once served as the mirror that reflected their false superiority. Now that mirror isn't working. You're no longer responding, no longer reacting, no longer performing. And that infuriates them in ways they can't explain. What you need to understand is this: you don't need to fight them. You don't need to expose them, confront them, or prove anything. Your calm is the answer. Your silence is the revolution. When you no longer explain, when you no longer send long texts, when you stop crying because they just don't understand you, you are dismantling their power at its core. They never truly controlled you through action. They controlled you through reaction. They wrote the script, and you, out of fear, out of love, out of hope, played the part. But now, as you refuse to play the role, as you step off the stage, the play ends. And suddenly, they're no longer the lead, just a performer left alone in an empty theater. Many people think that winning against a narcissist means exposing them publicly, forcing them to apologize, watching them beg you to come back. But that's just the wounded version of you still longing for justice. The real victory is when you no longer need them to understand you. When you can walk away from the relationship and not feel like a failure. When you don't need anyone to validate the pain you've been through. You know it was real. When you don't need them to admit that you love them. You know you did. And most of all, when you don't need an apology to move on. You move forward anyway, with your head high, your heart light, and a freedom you didn't think was possible. When the narcissist realizes you're no longer afraid of them, they lose the one thing that kept them in control: dominance. They can't tolerate equality, and they certainly can't stand being ignored. Your indifference, your absence, your silence, those are the deepest blows to an ego that relies on attention to survive. You don't need to scream, you don't need to prove anything. The fact that you're no longer emotionally available to be manipulated, that's the collapse of their system. They may try to replace you, but deep down they know. No one reflected their false identity back to them the way you once did. And that's why they don't forget you. Not out of love, but out of supply withdrawal. But this time, you don't return. Not out of anger and not out of regret, but because you're no longer the same person. You are no longer afraid. You no longer need to be understood. You are finally strong enough to see the truth. Not everyone knows how to love, and not everyone deserves your sacrifice. And precisely because you're no longer afraid, you finally find the courage to choose what you once thought was weakness: silence. Not the kind of silence used to manipulate, ignore, or punish, but the kind of silence that speaks with undeniable clarity. I no longer need to explain myself to someone who refuses to understand. And from that moment on, you begin to realize why silence is the most powerful weapon you'll ever wield against a narcissist, one that breaks them in ways no words ever could. Because the truth is, a narcissist isn't afraid of your anger. In fact, they crave it. They want you to scream, cry, and beg, because every emotional reaction confirms that they still matter. But what they have no defense against is your stillness. In that stillness, they lose their sense of importance. They can no longer orchestrate the emotional dance they've led for so long. Every tactic they've relied on, gaslighting, cold shoulders, backhanded compliments, disappearing acts, suddenly loses all its power. What they fear most isn't you leaving. It's you leaving with peace. When you walk away in pain, they can still believe they left a scar. But when you walk away quietly, with no bitterness, no hate, no drama, they're left face to face with the truth they cannot bear. You've healed, and that's when a chain reaction begins within them. They may spiral into panic, launch smear campaigns, rush to replace you with someone new, or even attempt to hoover, reappearing with sweet words and promises of change. But here's what you must remember. None of it is really about you anymore. It's about the void you left behind. A void they can't fill, because what they truly lost wasn't just a partner or a person. It was the emotional control they fed on. Still, maintaining that silence is no easy task, because in the past you were conditioned to justify yourself, to explain, to beg for clarity, to make things right. But now you are learning something far more powerful. You don't need understanding to move forward. You are learning to allow yourself to be misunderstood, misjudged, even villainized, without abandoning your truth, because ultimately you've chosen peace over being proven right. And from this choice, a new kind of boundary begins to form, one that isn't loud or defensive, but firm and undeniable. You no longer reply out of politeness. You no longer stay in conversations that lead nowhere. You no longer feel obligated to explain why you've changed, because you no longer seek permission to evolve. That silence becomes your sacred space, not to hide, but to rebuild yourself. In that quiet, you don't just avoid chaos, you begin to hear your own voice. You begin to separate real emotion from emotional manipulation. You begin to distinguish between love and trauma bonding, and you learn one of the most important lessons of all. Peace isn't something others give you. It's something you choose and protect every single day. Of course, there will be moments when you miss them. When certain memories, the good ones, try to seduce you back into nostalgia, but you've already learned. A few warm memories cannot redeem a pattern of psychological destruction. A few moments of kindness cannot excuse a foundation built on control and distortion. And you no longer live in the past, you live in the now, in clarity, in truth, in self-respect. And it's through that unwavering silence that the narcissist finally backs away. Not because you won, but because you become uncontrollable. They can't provoke you if you don't react. They can't manipulate you if you're no longer emotionally invested. They can't reel you back in if you've made yourself your own safe haven. In the end, what wounds the narcissist most deeply is not being exposed, not being insulted, not being screamed at. It's being forgotten, in silence, in serenity, in a life where they're no longer the center of your world. And that doesn't make you cruel. That makes you whole. It means you chose peace over chaos. You chose growth over guilt. You chose yourself. And no one gets to shame you for that. But healing doesn't end when you walk away in silence. In truth, that's only the beginning, because a narcissist doesn't easily let go of what once gave them power. And even if you're no longer under their control, you must prepare for the inevitable return, the hoovering phase, subtle yet sharp, like a silent undertow pulling at your peace. This is when the apologies start appearing. The messages show up. I've been thinking a lot, or you're the only one who ever really understood me. And if sweetness doesn't work, they'll flip the script, questioning your compassion, pressing your guilt. So, you're really just going to disappear? I never thought you could be this cold. At that moment, you need to remember why you left. Not because they never apologized, but because their apologies never came with real change. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you couldn't keep offering love to someone who weaponized it. And most importantly, not because you were too weak to stay, but because you had grown strong enough to walk away. To stay strong, you must learn to protect your boundaries as if they are your emotional immune system. Boundaries are not walls that isolate you. They are circles of safety that protect what you fought so hard to reclaim. And when a narcissist returns, the first thing they'll do is test those boundaries using the tool they know best: guilt. They might say, "I know I messed up, but nobody's perfect," or "If you truly forgave me, you'd give me another chance." But pause, ask yourself, does forgiveness mean reopening a door to someone who once shattered me? The answer is no. Forgiveness is something you do inside your soul. It doesn't require contact or approval or performance. If you respond only because you don't want to seem cold or because you feel obligated to be the bigger person, you're no longer acting from peace. You're acting from a deep-rooted fear of being misunderstood. And the narcissist knows this. They know you used to live by the code "never abandon someone in pain." They know you once bent over backward trying to understand others. And now they will use your compassion against you. Therefore, your silence must be matched with resolve, not the silence of anger, but the silence of clarity. The silence that says, "I see the cycle, and I choose not to step back into it." because any reply, even the kindest, can be twisted into an invitation, and sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself is to say nothing at all. Part of protecting your boundaries is learning how not to be triggered by emotional hooks. If they say, "I'm suffering," that doesn't mean you're responsible for their pain. If they say, "You're the only person who made me feel whole," that doesn't mean it's your job to keep them intact. They might pull out every trick in the book, play victim, resurrect old memories, highlight your past mistakes, but you are no longer the person trapped in that endless loop. Now, you don't react, you analyze. You don't fight, you observe. You don't spiral, you stay grounded. The truth is, you can't stop a storm, but you can learn not to walk into it. And the narcissist, no matter how many emotional storms they create, cannot touch you if you remain centered in the I, where your silence is untouchable. This is not an easy path. There will be moments of doubt. You'll question yourself. You may feel lonely. There will be times you wonder, am I being too harsh? Am I wrong to cut off contact completely? But then you'll remember the reflection in the mirror from those past days, the eyes that looked confused, exhausted, empty. You'll remember how it felt to tiptoe through every sentence, to silence your truth just to keep peace. And you'll realize the price of today's silence is far less than the cost of yesterday's survival. And from that realization, you'll begin building a new life, one where boundaries don't have to be shouted to be honored, a life where you choose people who feel safe, a life where you don't apologize for how you feel, a life where connection is based on authenticity, not obligation. And with every day that passes without checking your phone for their messages, with every night of deep, uninterrupted sleep, you reclaim another piece of yourself. Eventually you will understand, boundaries were never about pushing people away. They were about preserving what was left of you after surviving a storm no one else could see. And when you hold to that truth, the narcissist will eventually stop, not because you scared them, but because they no longer have a role in the story you are now writing for yourself. Now, imagine this. You wake up one morning and no longer reach for your phone to check if they've messaged you. Instead, you pause and listen to your own breath and realize there's a quiet space that's opened up in your chest. From that moment, you begin to walk the path of true rebirth. Each step an affirmation that peace isn't something granted by others, but a sacred privilege you now give yourself. As you make your morning coffee, you're no longer rehearsing emotional defenses to appease anyone. Instead, you ask yourself a simple question. What do I want to nurture today? From that one question, new habits begin to take root. Reading 10 pages that sharpen your mind, writing 5 sentences of gratitude to water your soul, and moving your body for 15 minutes as an act of alliance with the one thing that carries you through every battle, yourself. In relationships that follow, you no longer let past trauma be your guide. You enter conversations as an equal, open to listening, but also prepared to leave if manipulation rears its head. Because now, walking away isn't a sign of failure. It's a reflection of self-respect that's finally taken root. As the days unfold, those moments of quiet that once terrified you now become a canvas for creativity. You learn an instrument. You paint memories from your childhood in bolder, more vibrant colors. You journal without fear that someone will read and judge your truth. In that freedom, your imagination stirs. Dreams you once buried rise up and whisper, "Try again." This time. And in time, you start seeing your old pain not as a wound, but as fuel. Not something that weakens you, but something that propels you to serve. Maybe you share your story on a blog. Maybe you launch a small podcast on healing. Or maybe you simply sit beside a friend who's silently enduring what you once lived through. In that moment, your suffering transforms into empathy. Your fear becomes courage. And a voice within you finally says, "If what I've been through can light someone else's way, then it was never wasted." Alongside that transformation, you begin honing your ability to recognize boundaries with greater subtlety. One dismissive look, one joking comment that undermines your feelings. That's all it takes now for your inner alarm to sound. And because you've paid the price of ignoring that voice before, you no longer hesitate to course correct. You're decisive but not cruel, firm but never compromising your integrity. Simultaneously, you begin clearing out the mental clutter left behind by emotional dependency. You begin uninstalling those toxic inner programs like, I must be endlessly patient, or true love means limitless sacrifice. You replace them with new beliefs, ones like, kindness begins with not abandoning myself. Then you set long-term goals, not to impress anyone, but to design a life that truly nourishes your healing. Maybe you go back to school. Maybe you save for a restorative trip. Or maybe you simply commit to getting a full night's sleep each day. Each goal ties back to a simple but powerful question. Does this serve the peace I've worked so hard to protect? If yes, you move forward. If no, you walk away without apology. And in doing so, you learn to say, I'm sorry to the parts of you that you once neglected. You forgive yourself for the times you stayed too long. You learn to say thank you to the cracks that let the light in. And you learn to say goodbye to the people who no longer align with your healing without guilt or shame. Most importantly, you come to understand that silence is still your ultimate boundary, but now it's no longer just a shield. It's a mirror that reflects your inner clarity, and in moments when the world grows noisy again, you return to your breath, to your stillness, and ask, what truly matters right now? That question keeps you grounded, rooted in a place that no narcissist, no manipulator, no external chaos can touch. And eventually one afternoon, as you sit quietly watching the sunset, you realize you haven't thought about the narcissist in weeks. Not with anger, not with longing, not even with curiosity. You simply feel peace, a quiet lake after the storm. And in that moment, you understand the old cycle is closed, a new chapter has begun. This journey was never just about leaving someone else. It was always about coming home to yourself. And now, every boundary you've built is no longer a cold fortress. It's a blooming garden, a sacred place where those who enter feel the weight of your clarity, where those who leave understand that kindness no longer means self-erasure, and you walk forward with your head high, a soft smile on your face, and your soul intact, because in the end, the only one qualified to sign the birth certificate of your new life is you. And if there's one thing I wish you could truly understand, it's this. Don't walk away while still waiting for an apology from them. Don't turn your departure into a quiet song awaiting a final chord from the person who broke you, because there will be no apology deep enough to heal all the times you silently endured. No "I was wrong" will ever mend the parts of you that were held together only by tears and hope. And more than anything, no regret from them will ever restore the pieces of yourself you lost while trying to hold onto a one-sided love that only brought pain. Because the truth is, the apology you're waiting for doesn't come from them. It comes from you. It's the one you owe yourself for all the years you shrank, settled, and believed that if you just loved enough, things would change. It's the quiet whisper you need to say when you look in the mirror. I'm sorry for doubting my worth just because someone else couldn't see it. And from that realization, you rise, not with the posture of someone who won a battle, but with the grace of someone who finally accepted they don't need closure from another person to begin writing a new chapter. So, if today a part of you is still waiting for an explanation, a confession, or some grand act of remorse, let it go. Not because they don't owe you that, but because they will never be capable of offering it in the way you deserve. And you deserve far more: a freedom without strings, a heart no longer held hostage, and a future unchained from people who can't even name the pain they caused. Letting go doesn't make you weak. It simply means you no longer tie your worth to someone else's awakening. And that, right there, is when you are truly free. And when you've finally walked away without waiting for an apology, you must also prepare yourself not for a final conversation, but for the quiet war they will launch behind your back. Because to a narcissist, the fact that you dared to leave, unafraid, unapologetic, and without needing their validation, is a direct blow to their inflated sense of self. And that ego doesn't go down quietly. They won't sit back and let you live in peace, especially if you left with dignity and composure. They need a different narrative, one where you're the villain, the unstable one, the one who hurt them, so they can preserve the role they've always clung to, the victim. Make no mistake, they'll craft that story with frightening precision, not with screaming accusations, but with subtle distortions, half-truths. Carefully curated statements that sound heartfelt to outsiders. I tried everything but she changed so much, or I just wanted peace but he always needed control. And perhaps the most painful part, they'll share this story with people who once stood close to you, friends, co-workers, even family members. The goal isn't just to damage your reputation, it's to make you feel isolated, misunderstood, and worst of all, doubted by those you once trusted. And yes, it will hurt. Not because they've succeeded in destroying your name, but because you once believed they'd stop hurting you if you simply walked away. But here's the truth you must hold on to. They're not smearing you because you're wrong. They're smearing you because you're no longer under their control. Your name, your reputation, the perception others have of you, these become their new battleground. Because if they can't dictate how you feel anymore, they'll try to dictate how others see you instead. So prepare yourself. Not to fight back, but to stand firm. You don't need to chase every rumor. You don't need to defend every whisper. You don't need to reclaim every opinion. Every word you speak in self-defense can be twisted into proof of your instability. They'll say, "See? Look how obsessed they still are. Look how bitter." That's why, instead of falling into that trap, hold the silence you've trained so hard to master. Let your consistency, your actions, your calm speak for you, because eventually the truth reveals itself. Those who were misled will start to see the cracks. Those who truly know you will sense the peace you now carry. And those easily manipulated, they'll eventually become the narcissist's next targets. When that happens, they'll remember how you were treated. You can't control what others say about you, but you can absolutely control how you respond. And when you choose not to respond, you're not only protecting your peace, you're breaking the very cycle the narcissist is desperate to maintain. Don't let them drag you back into their battlefield just because they hate to lose. They can tarnish your name, but they can't touch the clarity you've reclaimed. And if you stay rooted in that, then no smear campaign, no matter how calculated, can shake the peace you now live in. After the smear campaign fades, a more subtle and often more painful form of attack begins, the arrival of the flying monkeys. They can be family, mutual friends, co-workers, or even people who once heard your side of the story, but now they're not here to understand, they're here to question, to help you fix things, to mediate, or worse, to tell you that you're the one causing drama. They've been fed a carefully crafted, twisted version of events by the narcissist, and they believe it. Not because they're evil, but because they don't understand manipulation psychology. They'll say things like, "Looks really hurt." "She's just trying to save the relationship. Are you sure you're not overreacting? You shouldn't make this a big deal. People will think you're being negative." And if you're not centered, these words can make you question yourself. You might start wondering, am I being too harsh? Am I pushing people away? Am I the one creating the conflict? Pause and take a deep breath. Flying monkeys aren't the enemy, but they've become a tool of the enemy. And how you respond now will determine whether you fall back into the web or stay free. You don't need to argue. You don't need to explain. And you absolutely do not need to educate them. Simply say, "I know he/she is telling their version of the story. I don't feel the need to respond. I'm focused on my peace." That isn't just a statement, it's a psychological boundary. a signal that says, you're no longer available to play a part in the narcissist drama. Because here's the truth, every tactic they use, from smearing, emotional guilt to flying monkeys, serves one single purpose: to pull you back in, to trigger you, to destabilize you. They don't need you back because they love you. They need you back to continue controlling you. But this time, you won't return. You've left, and you're not looking back, not because you're bitter, but because you're finally awake. When you no longer fear the narcissist, it's not just a sign of healing, it's a declaration of your worth. It's the moment you rise, not to fight, but to walk away, with the calm strength of someone who finally sees through the illusion of control. You don't need to scream, explain, or beg someone unworthy to understand. Your calm is what destabilizes them. Your silence is your loudest power. You've walked through the pain, the confusion, and the emotional chaos they tried to trap you in. But you're not there anymore. You're no longer a pawn in their emotional game. You are now the main character in your own life. And if you're in that place, where fear fades, boundaries rise, and clarity begins, know this: you're not alone. Millions are waking up just like you. And with every boundary you hold, you reclaim more of your freedom. Share this video with someone who needs it. Drop a comment below if this speaks to your story. Your voice could save someone else. And if you found value in this message, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep walking this path of healing with us. You deserve peace, and that journey begins the moment you stop fearing them.